Shall we kick off, Kirsty?
Let's do it.
Fantastic. Well, good morning, everyone. It's really great to see so many of you in attendance today, and we'd like to welcome you to our latest webinar, International Brand Storytelling, PR and Localization Strategies for Global Success. My name is James Brown, and I'm your host for today. We've got a really informative discussion coming up today and a very special guest who I'll introduce very shortly. But before we dive into our topic, I'd like to kick things off with a few housekeeping points introductions. We've got time for Q&A, of course, at the end of the session. So if you have any questions for myself or our special guest, Kirsty, please do pop those in the chat or use the QA function and we'll get to those at the end. We'll also be sharing a recording of the session in the coming weeks once it's live on our respective websites. So check your inboxes for a copy of that in due course. So to quickly introduce myself, my name is James, as mentioned, and I'm head of commercial at Comtec Translations. For those of you unfamiliar with Comtec, we are a language localization agency based in the UK, and we have over 40 years experience supporting international brands communicate with audiences. And we do that in over 250 languages, which is quite a tall feat, but we somehow manage it with our global network of professional linguists. I'm also delighted to be joined by our special guest, as mentioned, Kirsty Jarvis of Luminous PR. Kirsty, do you want to tell us a bit about yourself and Luminous PR?
Yes, absolutely. Good morning, James, and good morning, everybody. That was a very lovely intro to be called a very special guest. I didn't get
You
that
are a special
often.
guest.
Thank you. Yeah, so as James said, I'm Kirsty Jarvis, and I am the CEO and founder of Luminous PR. We are a tech PR agency that works with businesses of all shapes and sizes, from the teeny tiny up to the really big global tech companies. And yeah, we do a lot of work helping businesses with all the kind of traditional PR needs that you would expect of an agency. But equally, we also help international businesses coming into the UK and also UK businesses going out into the other world. Hence why I think this is going to be a great chat today, because we both have different experiences of helping businesses to move into different markets.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Kirsty. And you've literally brought me on to my segue to that really very nicely. So why are Luminous and Comtec? Why are we here today? Why have we joined forces for this webinar? As Kirsty's mentioned, we've both got lots of experience working with international brands, helping them communicate on a global scale. And while our expertise might be different, PR in Kirsty's case, localization in mine, one area where we do cross over a lot is helping our clients tell powerful stories through the work that we do. From a PR perspective, this of course means crafting compelling content to boost brands and their perception. And from a localization perspective, it means capturing the essence of a story and adapting it in a culturally appropriate way for the global audience. And that's why we've teamed up today for this really webinar on building brand perception and telling that in a globally, regionally appropriate way. So, some of the things we're going to be covering today are how to build a brand toolkit to shape regional narratives, how to avoid common pitfalls when localizing campaigns, and how to align translation, PR, and also cultural awareness for true cross-border success. And of course, we'll be answering your questions as well. So if you're looking for guidance on how to craft a compelling story for your brand or the brands you're working for and how to transmit that internationally, this is hopefully the webinar for you. And I'm very excited to pick Kirsty's brains from a PR perspective and also add in a few of my own nuggets from localization perspective. So shall we kick off, Kirsty?
Let's do it. Yeah, let's go for it.
Fantastic. So Kirsty, my first question for you, one of the things we've spoken about previously at length actually is when you're talking about telling a regionally appropriate story, one of the key elements to how to get started is building a brand toolkit. It would be great if you could share with the audience how to go about building this toolkit and where to get the information you need.
Yeah, so I think the first, I mean, you've mentioned storytelling, and I think the one thing to mention, we all, if we are looking at moving out of the market that you know really, really well, some of the mistakes that people make is they think that they can just take that story with them wherever they go. And as you've said, it's about that kind of localization, which is really important. But I think the thing that makes a story really, really resonate within different regions is to find ways to kind of make yourself look relevant. So you may have to adapt actually the way you talk, the way you look in some cases, and where you play actually in some cases. So you've got to look at the components of the story that you have, and then how can you almost find those little puzzle pieces that make you look really relevant within that market. So that could be, do you have any localized data? Is there anything that any insight that you might be sitting on that you can share with that new region? What do you know about that market, and then how can you make yourself kind of fit within that conversation from a storytelling perspective? And what you don't already have, you might have to do a little bit of a deep dive before you're looking at going into the market. So often some of this work is kind of pure R&D. You might be doing that anyway about, if you're looking at opening an office, you might be thinking, where is the best location for me? Where do I find my talent? What does it mean for, what do I need to know about the legal requirements of hiring people? But also, all of that work gets done really upfront, but also it's like, what do you know about that region really? What's coming up on the cultural agenda? Is there something really important from a storytelling perspective that you can maybe align with? All of those things you've got to sort of start thinking about really from a really early point of view.
Yeah, I'd completely agree with you. And this is something we talk about a lot in localization. And um, I always like to say to my clients, preparation is key with localization. If you run in and just translate your content without any prep, it's not going to get the results that you need. And often it's the prep work at the content creation strategy stage, which actually enables the success of localization. Within
Mm.
localization, we're taking your key messages and putting them into the relevant words for the local market. But there's also a piece to do to make sure the content is ready and appropriate for that market in the first place. So I think if we're looking at the toolkit, I think market research is so fundamental. Knowing the politics, commercial things as well. One of our clients' things they've talked about in the past is like legal, what's policy for their product, or in adjacent things like environmental policy if they
Yeah.
are producing content, producing products. So we do a lot of work with them to kind of help them identify those things, and also then what does that look like when you get to a localization perspective.
Yeah. It's even silly little things like timing, knowing when the school holidays are, knowing
Yeah.
when there's national holidays, because if you've got this big launch planned and you've got all your story and everything ready, when's the right time to do that? So you're right. I think it's, yeah, all that market research and really kind of diving in is that.
Absolutely. And it's simple things like you've just said around knowing when people work, working patterns. France, for example, they often will shut down in August and people will take that time off. So August in France might not be the best time for launching a marketing campaign.
Mm,
In the Middle East, weekends are Friday and Saturday. Sunday's a working day. So it's little things like knowing when to kind of activate things and when to kind of work around different cultures and how they behave is really, really, really useful. But I think, yeah, the big point for me in terms of building up Brand Toolkit is the preparation stage and thinking about the language, the culture, and at that first stage, it's really, really intrinsic in understanding that market. So yeah,
mm,
great answer. Um, so that brings us really nicely to my next question. I'd like to talk about brand perception.
mm,
So at Comtec, we work with a lot of brands across B2C, B2B, all different industries from fashion, automotive, manufacturing, you name it, we translate for them in some way, shape, or form. Um, and we work with a lot of agencies a lot to support these brands to really help them boost their perception, boost the brand's perception in the eyes of a global audience. And we've seen it work really, really well. A really good example I always like to refer to is McDonald's. I think they localize fantastically. If you go to a McDonald's in any different country, everything is different. Down to the menu, the layout of the stores, everything is fully localized for that customer experience in market. And from a linguistic perspective, I've seen them do some really great stuff. Um, I love how they have localized their slogan. You might remember the famous "I'm loving it" slogan with a little jingle. They really localized that for different markets. The German perspective, the German version of that is very much to it's very much literal in terms of and direct, whereas the Brazilian version is actually very expressive, and it's actually a longer phrase to really get the kind of to capture how that culture speaks and operates linguistically and culturally. So there's some really cool stuff there. And I think we've seen it with working with McDonald's on transcreation for Happy Meal content, where again, they really tailor the offering and the content for the market before it even comes to translation. So the content is different. It's been adapted at the English stage to really resonate. And it's that powerfulness that really helps their brand be perceived really well because they're really thinking about what they're creating. That said, though, there's also, if you go online, there's lots of common blunders you can see from other big brands, which we've all seen. We've all seen the translation fail, famous websites. Um, and where people have really just failed, unfortunately, to kind of present their brand in the best way in a different market. So there is a fine line between success and failure. Kirsty, my question for you, to cut a long story short, what are some of the ways brands can damage their perception, and what's the impact of that in real terms?
Yeah, so I mean, I think again, I think the first thing to talk about here is it's like actually, if you're a brand entering a new market, you have to work so hard as an outsider within that region to kind of get the traction, especially if you're in a really competitive space. So all those things that you said about really thinking about the words that you say and where
Yeah.
is the appropriate places to say them is really important. And I really love the example of the McDonald's, because actually I was going to talk about the Walmart example,
Yes.
which is so for anyone that doesn't know the story, I think many people have probably heard this case study now, but Walmart, massive US brand, global brand, actually launched into Germany, and they applied the same tone of voice that they would use in the US market, which was very cheerful, quite playful as a brand for the German market, which the German customers actually found really off-putting, and in the end they pulled out of the region. So you talk about brand perception, it's not just about the words you say, but it's the tone that you say them in, and is it are you kind of communicating in the appropriate way for that region. But but you talk about kind of the failure of that, because you have to work so hard as a new brand. You kind of only get one chance to get it right, and I mean, if you're a big player, somebody like Walmart, or there was the famous Pepsi Live for Now campaign, which was Kendall Jenner, and they totally misjudged the market there, and really the brand reputation took a long time to repair in the UK market after that campaign. If you're an emerging brand, or your brand doesn't have the multi-millions of budget, you kind of only have one chance to get it right. So sometimes being a little bit more conservative, again, doing all that R&D really upfront, and making sure that you're talking like a local, you really understand the people, as well as the business landscape and the customer. It's the kind of emotive side of that new place that you might be going into that has to really be well considered beforehand. And it can make and break a brand at the end of the day, and especially with some of the brands that we work with, the startups, with that one chance of getting it right, they also working with very small budgets in some cases. So you can't turn around from a really bad execution of that. It's got to be done well from the beginning.
That's so true. I think all you're talking about here, Kirsty, is like the main point is the preparation again. Is to do
Yeah,
due diligence. I think it's so important.
I feel this is going to be a theme throughout the preparation side of things.
It does feel like the running theme for brand storytelling and prepare. So
Yeah.
that's really, really good. But I think again, one thing we say in localization is take the time, care and attention. If you're producing all this great content for your kind of home market or original market, and it's especially if it's for external purposes, but PR, marketing, brand, you've got to spend the same amount of time thinking about it for every other market. And that's not just taking it and translating it. You've got to think beforehand and afterwards as well. So I think that's just a really nice message. Prepare and take the time, care, and attention.
I think it's also worth really, just even if you have a couple of hours, having a conversation with someone that is a local consultant in that area, because you know, much as you can do all this due diligence, and I know we're going to talk about that in a minute, about the kind of things that you can do to help prepare, but it's yeah, you know, there's nothing better than actually talking to someone that is there and can tell you, you know, you may not have thought of this, and that will be so valuable to you. It's not that you need to have someone necessarily, you know, on the books that kind of is there and helping you week on week, but someone at the point where you're setting that strategy that can kind of almost give you second eyes over it and point out any potential failure points or any barriers that you may come across. That's, you know, really valuable at the early stages.
Fantastic advice. I think that's so true. Um, So I think we've talked about what are the pitfalls and what are some of the ways that what are the steps that brands can take to really make sure they are appropriately telling stories across borders and really avoiding these pitfalls. What maybe are your top 3 or 4 bits of advice?
Well, it always amazes me when we get briefs from clients that come in and say, you know, we've done really well in this market and we now want to launch into the UK. I'm going to use launching into the UK as an example rather than going somewhere else. But and we ask them, right, so what do you know about the UK market? And what they will quote to me typically is a whole load of global statistics, or, you know, this is my need in market, this is my proof of, you know, proof of worth. But there's absolutely nothing that shows that kind of linking. So the first thing we do is we kind of set them quite a lot of homework to say, right, go and subscribe to local news channels, go and subscribe to some of the trade publications, go and follow your competitors and do your due diligence and learn from them right from the beginning. Anything that can kind of help you over a period of time understand what they're doing, because also actually looking at things like trade associations and people that are already doing it, they're blazing a path for you to follow. You just need to understand and learn and then bring your own unique magic to it, because you will be unique. You're a different company, you
Yeah,
will have your own experiences. And the globalization actually can be a really good differentiator for you. But again, it's about getting that story right at that beginning point, and you can only really do that if you're stalking what else is happening in the market. So Google News alerts are brilliant. We use those a lot. So you can not only set it up for competitors, but you can also set that up for specific terminologies in a particular country or area that you're moving into. That's really great to do. And then, you know, start to understand what the trends and the things that are happening while you're monitoring those things. This shouldn't be like a one-time piece of R&D. You
yeah,
probably should have someone on the team that's just kind of following that over a period of time and then flagging it and bringing it to strategy sessions that's saying, you know, actually this is something that is really important to our target customers there at the moment, and it's really different from what we know here. So how can we create a story that really fits around that?
yeah. That's really actionable as well. That's something so simple you can do. Set Google alerts. So I think that's a
Yeah.
great piece of advice. I think how I would contribute to the conversation is similarly understanding the culture. As a kind of localization agency, one of our kind of niche areas is supporting brands with understanding the culture. And there's so many nuggets you can get from understanding behaviors when you start digging into a culture, understanding it. Um, we work with the Hofstadter model, and which is 6 elements of culture. So looking at how masculine versus feminine a culture is, looking at how a culture manages uncertainty. Culture is so much more when you start learning about it than just what people eat and how people dress and where they go on holiday and what music they listen to. It's
Yeah.
so much deeper than that. It really helps you define the why. And that's what some of the work we do with global brands is helping them, whether it's sharing insights reports on markets or delivering workshops to help them understand culture and the markets they're working in, helping them unlock these things and understanding, oh, that's why they behave like that.
Mm.
There's a few really good examples of where I've kind of realized, oh, actually, that makes total sense. And one of them I wanted to share was around the use of headphones. So in the UK, why do we put on a headphones? It's because we want to listen to music and kind of switch off from everyone else. Now, in other cultures, in some other cultures, and Japan is a primary one, people listen to headphones, use headphones for a very different reason. It's actually not is to not disturb others. So actually the use of that product is a totally different reason of why you're using that product.
So fascinating, isn't it? How, and I think the thing is as well around the kind of the value of really understanding that sort of cultural
Yeah,
sentiment and, you know, all of those little fragments of a new culture. Once you know that stuff, if you're really thinking then going on about building a story,
yeah.
about going and generating some of your own research in the region that uses that and then brings something, because at that point you're then driving that conversation yourself, and that isn't a very expensive thing to do as well. So I know in the UK we can, you know, you can do one question to 2,000 consumers or, you know,
Yeah.
businesses, for example, and it's £350. You can do that within that market as well, and imagine just like how much more respect and credibility you're going to get if you can actually come to something new with that conversation.
Absolutely. And we see a lot in B2C where consumer behavior is so, so different
Mm,
across markets with products. And that example there, like if you're taking this market, use this product for this reason versus this reason, you can craft content for that speaks to their buying points. And then we can localize that using the relevant style and tone of voice to take those messages and really kind of capture them. So I think the more prep at the strategy stage, again, understanding that culture is so, so important. And that's, from a localization perspective, the key to real success.
mm. Yeah, I agree.
In terms of kind of getting strategy operationalized, there's lots of people obviously involved in the international storytelling process. Who are some of the people that you feel need to be involved in this process?
Um, yes. I mean, basically, I think anybody C-suite level really that has any kind of input into setting a regional strategy should be there. That is probably in your home space, as well as if you're hiring anybody within the new market that you're moving into, definitely. I think the people that typically are the last to know tend to be kind of the people that communicate, and maybe even the sales teams. So
Yeah.
often a forgotten part of this. So I think, you know, from a, you know, marketing, you know, from the marketing, comms, sales, maybe at kind of mid to senior level should be involved as well, just so that they are understanding the strategy and then some of those subtleties, because they're going to be coal face with those conversations, aren't they, when you're starting to sort of try and sell and grow within that region.
That's 100% true. And I think it's such a holistic process as well, understanding that and gain that customer experience across all touch points as well. There's the brand storytelling in terms of comms, but there's also when people come to you as consumers or customers, it's then making sure that experience is coming from your team as well. So I love the fact that you've touched on customer service and sales teams also having understanding. It's something we've worked with them before from a cultural perspective, helping them understand different cultures and just being aware of that conversation that everyone kind of does need that different,
Yeah.
everyone operates in a different way. So super, super fascinating stuff.
Yeah, and they might know their story again in the market that they've been operating in for some time. But, you know, actually, if there has been some subtle changes, then, you know, making sure you're doing good workshops on that and that everybody is really on board, creating the right kind of
Absolutely.
information packs and support for them, I think is really important as well.
Absolutely. I think from a localization perspective, a lot of the teams you've mentioned are also really intrinsic to the process. So
Yeah.
we will often work with typically how a global campaign will work is it's being briefed in by the kind of the core HQ market. That
Mm,
typically for us it's the UK or the US. Um, but then alongside them, there are the regional marketing teams as well. It might be one person, it might be a team. But it's so important to get them all on the same page with HQ as well. And
mm,
that's obviously from a strategy perspective, but also from a localization. So a lot of the work that we do is working alongside HQ to understand what the global brand voice is, and then working with people in the local markets to get their feedback and their insights. The reason being, they're not just native speakers, they're not just based in market, but they're employees of that business. They know that brand inside out, and
mm.
what they say is going to be the best insights from from a local perspective. So it's working with them, capturing their feedback and feeding it back into the comms. So we've got the global brand message, it's being localized effectively, and it's also being localized effectively in line with um, the regions as well. So yeah, it's a holistic process, but it works, and I think that's what I would recommend in terms of kind of who needs to be involved with that brand voice piece and perception piece from a global perspective.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I think also agency partners as well, like bringing them in, and bringing them in early, because you know, I know I'm biased because I am an agency partner, but we do roll our eyes when we get someone that's like, "Hey, we're launching in 2 weeks' time. Can you give?" And the strategy is rolling by that point, and we're like, "Oh, right, okay, well, we wouldn't have done that, or perhaps we wouldn't have, you know." Or so I think actually bringing them into the mix as well. And again, I don't think it has to be that you engage someone long term. It could be an
Yeah.
initial conversation and getting that value up front, and then, you know, you then start with them at the point when you're ready to kind of, you know, all the flags go waving at that point. But yeah, I think agency partners, I don't know how, you know, whether you find the same thing, but sometimes you get brought in quite quite late.
Yeah, exactly. And I'd say the earlier the better, really. And even
Yeah.
if you might not think we need to be involved, it's sometimes just being involved in that room and that call, just listening and observing is just really, really helpful at the briefing stage, understanding. There's always little bit insights that you can glean to help you do better in your job further down the line. So that's what I would encourage for any kind of direct clients on the direct brands on the call, is like get your agencies involved, even from a listening perspective, just early on, so they can be involved in the briefing. It all helps.
Yeah, to use the famous brand "Every Little Helps" from Tesco. Yeah, I think that's,
Indeed.
yeah, an extra ear doesn't hurt, I think, at the beginning.
Absolutely. I think there's definitely been some current, some running themes from ourselves, Kirsty, today, all about preparation, involving agencies at the early stages, and really taking a holistic view to
Mm.
the to get capturing the international brand voice and introducing everyone. That's all the key points I think we plan to talk about today. So we'd love to hear from. And first of all, thank you so much, Kirsty, for all your insights. I really appreciate you joining us today, and it's been fascinating to
Thank
kind
you
of
for
get
having me.
a different
Great.
perspective on the same topic.
Yeah, and I'm always really, I mean, it's amazing what you guys do. 250 different languages is, you know, I mean, we just have to deal with one language and it's complicated sometimes. So yeah, to do that across multiple borders is really cool, really cool.
Fantastic. Thank you. Well, thank you so much. Right, we've got some time for questions, and we've got one in the chat already. Um, one of the attendees has a request, as mentioned. You mentioned a framework called the Six Elements of Culture that we use at Comtec. Could you tell us more about it? Who is it by? Yes, absolutely. So one of the framework we use for our cultural awareness training is the Hofstadter model. So Geert Hofstadter was a German philosopher, and he's very much focused on understanding culture. He's created a framework called the Six Dimensions of Culture, which essentially looks at six core elements of what makes a culture, really, and how different cultures interact with each other. We work with specialists who have been trained in the Hofstadter model, who help us deliver training to our clients and help them understand the culture, gain that understanding of how a culture differs first of all from each other, and then doing some deep dives into different markets, really, and how they do. We've got a fantastic webinar on our website that was delivered by one of our cultural specialists last year, and she basically gave a sneak peek of of her training courses and how what some of the six elements are, and some real cool examples. You can have a look at that on our website. It will explain it much better than I can. But if anyone would like a copy and can't find it, just drop me a message on LinkedIn, and I will be more than happy to share the relevant URL with you. But yeah, it's really fascinating stuff. And you do, having even someone like myself who's been around languages all my career, or my university at school, lived abroad in several countries, doing this training and understanding more about the culture, you do think, that's why they behave like that, or that's why that happened, or that's why that interaction didn't go the way I thought it would. So it's really, really, really powerful stuff. I
Yeah.
definitely recommend checking it out.
I put the spelling of the Hofstadter model into the answer just because I had to look that up as well.
Thank you very much. I might have butchered his first name, but I think I got the second one right in terms of pronunciation. Oh, fantastic. Does anyone else have any other questions they'd like to ask?
How essential would you say it is to have native speakers involved in strategy planning from an early stage? Well, actually, I mean, I can answer that, but I do think that's probably a James question. From a PR perspective, I don't think it's essential to have all the way through, but in that strategy planning, I think it's really, really important. So I'll give you an example. We've been doing quite a lot of work actually with Turkish businesses looking at launching in the UK. And whilst their English is absolutely flawless and how it's written, sometimes it just sounds a little clunky. The colloquialisms just don't quite work. The phraseology doesn't quite work sometimes.
Yeah.
And one of the things I think, you that kind of look like a local, phrase that I used earlier, you may have the website in place and it's all in the right language, but actually just a little bit of a sense check sometimes does help. But James, I'm sure you've got much more on this in terms of kind of native language speakers, because you deal with that all the time.
No, I think what you've summed up really nicely. I think it's just that level of check from an
Yeah.
authentic kind of consumer essentially. So one thing we do quite a lot with our customers is content audits. So this is really where we see this a lot is in things like e-learning, B2C campaigns, and websites in general. And clients will share their English version with us and say, "Is this going to work?" Because it might not translate directly into the local market. And it's often little things we'll pick out, for example, and it's stuff that you wouldn't think about potentially beyond the text. So imagery, is the imagery going to work? Is the use of color best color? Colors have different connotations in different markets.
Mm.
Is the layout appropriate? Is all the information there, is the legal information actually okay for that market? Do we need to recommend actually looking at the T's and C's again and getting them adjusted for that particular market? So I'd say, yeah, there's a lot a linguist can help you uncover, I think, from that process.
Yeah, and I think also just talking, because you're talking about sometimes quite significant brand shifts. If you have to create a new website or a complete look and feel, which you said about color, for example, those things are not quick to do. They sometimes can take a good 3 months. So if you find out that stuff later within the process, you are at risk of potentially having to push back your launch.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And we've seen it go wrong with where we've been given content to localize too late, and it's not hitting the mark because of the content itself, not the language. And it's the way it's written, the way it's been created is not suitable for the market. So yeah, I think just again going back to our previous point, get people involved earlier, even if it's internal people who are native speakers of the market. You don't have to outsource. Hope you might be lucky enough to have native speakers internally. They're going to be your best bet to kind of sense check things, share the English strategy. Is this going to work, do you think? Anything here that you think we might need to tweak or think about? I'd certainly recommend that as a first point.
And also, sorry, just as a final point on that, because this is something that's happened recently, just sending a piece of copy to someone that's a native speaker without any strategic context is also not very helpful, because they will give you a kind of, well, on paper this looks good, but actually if you give them a really good briefing about what you want that connection to be,
Yeah,
or perhaps your sales strategy, you're going to get much more from them.
absolutely. Context is always key. So that's brilliant. Thank you, Kirsty. We've had one more question pop in. So, in markets where more than two languages are spoken, how do you make sure you can appeal to the whole market at once? That's a very good question. I'm going to answer it from a linguistic perspective, because I think this is one that can often get lost. So think about English, for example. English is spoken in a lot of places in the world, and yes, we can understand it. If there's a American website or American piece, can we understand that? Yes. Can we read it? Yes. But are there differences? Absolutely. And if we notice that in US content, native speakers will notice that in different markets as well. A really good example is Belgium, because it's dual language. Half the country speaks French, half the country speaks Belgian, Dutch, or Flemish. That said, those languages are not just French and Dutch; they are Dutch and French for that particular market. So when you're requesting translation, it's really important to understand who the market is. French for France, will it work for Belgium? Probably. Will it be fully tailored? Probably not. Same with the Dutch variant as well. Same with Canada as well. That's dual English, French. Canadian French is very different to French. It's much more antiquated in terms of traditional French language. French for France has moved on quite a lot and developed with much more influences from other languages as well. So there's actually a huge difference there. So I think when you're looking from a linguistic perspective, it's knowing the language as well as the culture and making sure that you are really speaking to that audience as well. Switzerland's another good example, and Austria, yes, they speak German, but there's different spellings, there's different grammar, there's different terminology, and it can be quite prevalent, one more than the other. But it's just knowing these things and making sure that you can you're really tailoring and you can adapt. You can take a German piece and localize it for Switzerland, and you can localize it for Austria as well. So I think take the time of really knowing your market, what they speak from a linguistic perspective is really fundamental.
Yeah, and I think from a PR and comms perspective, the question is a really good one, and I think the answer will depend on, do you have customers in both that will be working in both of those languages? And if they do, then you need two separate strategies for each of those markets. And you will need to, if you're, so for example, if you're doing a news announcement, and you will have to have two press releases, you'll have to be pitching to two probably different speaking publication groups, and they will also have their same, as you've described, James, you know, the same kind of idiosyncrasies that need to be considered when you're looking at doing that from a PR and comms perspective as well.
Absolutely, that's a great question, Kirsty. We've got one more question as well. Please, can I share the title of the webinar mentioned on the website? I will have a quick look now. If anyone's got another question for Kirsty while I go and get the exact title, I will be right back.
Putting you on we need some little hold music playing now.
Absolutely, we really do. We really do. Putting the spot right there. Bear with me 2 moments. It's, where are we?
You really don't think about how, yeah, because you kind of say, I need something doing in French, but I hadn't really thought about the fact that you've in different places there's different versions of appropriate language within the French language. So yeah, that's made me think for a couple of.
Absolutely, it's so different, and making sure it's all working effectively is so important. I can't spot this off the top of my head. So what I would suggest you do is, if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, I will get you the webinar recording, because I can't seem to spot it on our website, although it should be there. I just can't work out which graphic it is.
Okay.
Fantastic. We've got one other question. Are there any other resources you'd recommend to help with understanding culture and behaviours? Kirsty, do you want to have a go at that one first?
So we mentioned like news, potential partners in the region. I think that connecting with them early is a really, and when I say partners, I don't mean like agency partners or people that are going to help you launch. I mean, you know, people that might open up their customer base to you. Actually getting in conversation with them really early is a great thing to do. Industry bodies may be able to help you. Going to events, actually, if you have the budget to do it, going to some in-market events, and you know, really kind of getting to talk to people, using and sort of approaching that not necessarily always just from a sales perspective, but also from a market research perspective as well. So if you've got members of the team that, you know, you want to really understand how people behave in a certain way in a certain area, you're getting maybe some of your junior members of the team just doing some polls, or, you know, anything like that could be great. I did mention doing some in-market research, and that I think is a great way of doing it. So if we've ever done global PR surveys where we perhaps had the same questions running in 3 different markets, that is absolutely fascinating to see how people really do think differently about different things. And it doesn't have to be thousands and thousands of pounds to do that. You can do that quite cost effectively. But I definitely, I think anything that you can own in terms of your own research will not only be brilliant for your own insight, but it will also give you that kind of localized content possibilities. It's things that you can share on your social, anything that just makes you look like you belong, that you understand them. It is great. Yeah, I think obviously social media, that's a really good one, although that is a bit of a rabbit hole sometimes. So I think like trying to be a bit more targeted with Google News and some of the publications in the region. ChatGPT is also really good for this, actually. So if you're not sure what the publications are in the region, you can also ask it to do a kind of summary of like, so if I want to reach these customers in this market, what would they read? And it's a great long list to kind of give you a good starting point anyway. And from there, you'll probably find the competitive media publications through that.
I find that again really, really useful and easy to find resources as well there. I'll just throw in as well the Hofstetter website. There's lots of resources on there that are really, really useful. I've also linked in the chat the URL to the webinar. I found it. I just couldn't remember the name of it off the top of my head, so that's now in the chat for you all. One thing we do at Comtec is we help brands understand the market. So we offer cultural market playbooks where we essentially bring the information together for you to share all the information on a market in terms of behavior, color, insights into the culture. If you'd like a copy of that, if you'd like one of these creating for a particular market, please do get in touch. We also have a free version for the UK, so you can see the kind of level of insights we can offer as well. Again, if you'd like that, please drop me a line on LinkedIn and I'll give you a copy. Fantastic. I think that's all of our questions answered. So thank you so much for attending, everyone, and thank you, Sarah, for your kind words in the in the chat. That's very kind of you. And I'm glad you've enjoyed the webinar today. If anyone has any questions at all for myself and Kirsty, Kirsty, where can they reach you?
You can reach me on LinkedIn, but also, yeah, obviously, Luminous PR is my business, as I said, and so you can always reach me through there as well. But yeah, definitely LinkedIn. Come and find me. It'd be nice to connect to everybody.
Absolutely, and same with me on LinkedIn, and I've got a profile on the Comtec website where you can get my details as well. So yeah, thank you so much everyone for attendance, and big thank you, Kirsty, again for joining us. It's been fascinating to have you on the call today, and yeah, thank you as always for your guidance and support.
Thanks for having me.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Well, have a lovely day, everyone. As mentioned, we'll be sending a recording round of the webinar in the coming weeks, so look out for that in your inbox, and have a fantastic day ahead. Thank you. Bye.